All right, Easter hangover week here. New series, from Easter to Esther. And what I love about this church is you guys actually ask me for homework. You're like, hey, Brian, you haven't posted what we're supposed to be reading this week. We want to read the Bible along with you. And so I posted, read the entire book of Esther, and you guys did. And so yay for being a church that is in the Bible and reading the Bible together. The title of this series is Hidden God. Esther, if you've read it, is one of the more curious books of the Bible, mainly because there is no mention of God. Not by name. There's no praying. There's no talking to God. There's no prophecy. There's no hearing from God. Mostly the book is filled with drunkenness, sex, rage, and murder. A story much more fitted for HBO than it is the Bible. Now, this book of Esther, it is a story. From front to back, it's a story. That's what it is. It's a retelling of an event with an agenda by the author. It's a dramatization of the event. And so the stories of the Bible, when we read them like Ruth and Esther, they are more than just stories, but they're not less than stories. And so the authors, just like authors today, use different techniques to draw in the audience and to convey their message. And so they include drama and tension and hope. And just like every good story, there's a complication, this scene that happens, and then there's a resolution by the end of the story. And so as we go through this story, we're going to see all of those techniques being used. But he uses one of the most brilliant techniques, I think, in all of Scripture in this story. The author is going to leave God out of the story, as I mentioned. And he's going to leave God out of the story to force us to look for God in the story. He wants us to see that God is at work, even when we don't see him, even in the coincidences, even in the mess. And so in thinking kind of how to get us started with this and how to teach it, do I teach the whole story start to finish the first week, or do I go through kind of chapter by chapter like we usually do? We're going to do kind of chapter by chapter. So we're going to take the first chapter and a half tonight, and really I just want to tell you the story and then see what we can learn from that story tonight. So here's the story. It takes place about 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Jews. If you don't know this, the Jews are God's chosen people. They've been exiled from their land, and now they're spread out throughout multiple continents. And so this is the diaspora. It's living in societies dominated by values much different than the values of their own. And so this story tonight takes place in Susa. It's the capital city of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire at this time is the most powerful empire on the planet. And so there's four main characters in this story. We might as well just introduce them here right out of the gate. Two of them are Jewish, God's chosen people. So God's not in the story, but God's people are in the story. The two Jewish characters are Mordecai, he's the uncle, and then his niece, Esther, who the book is named after. We've got the Persian king, Xerxes. I taught this about 10 years ago in a Sunday school class when I was a new Christian. I guess I thought it was really funny. I called him Xerxes the Jerxes. So if that helps you remember him tonight, he's Xerxes the Jerxes. And then we've got his royal vizier. His name is Jafar. It's Haman. He's the cunning villain. I don't know why this makes me think of Aladdin, but it's the cunning villain. And so this story, it's going to open with a party. And this isn't just any party. Not a frat house party. This is Animal House on steroids. This party lasts for 180 days. And basically, he brings in all of his wealthy friends, and he wants them to see all of his wealth. And so he takes this 180 days to just party and display his wealth. And so there are gold and silver couches. I don't know what a gold couch is like, but there are gold and silver couches. There are mosaic tiles, these beautiful marble columns, purple ribbons. You know, purple is an expensive color. The king is rolling out his best day after day, just like a lot of you guys do on social media. You want everybody to see your best. While this party is going on, it is an open bar for 6 months. It's not just any old wine. The book says it's royal wine. I don't know what that means, but it's top shelf wine. And then after the first 180 days, they're not done partying. They're like, you know what? us rich people, we had our party, us 1%, but we're going to bring in the 99% to party with us. So the last 7 days, they invite in the commoners to have the party with them. And here's what it says in verse 8, by edict of the king. This is by edict of the king. No limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. First rule of Club Xerxes there are no rules. This is a wild party. And if you caught that, only men were invited to this party. Now, women were having their own party, and the queen is hosting that party, but this is a man's party. And so there is drunkenness, there is gluttony, there's overindulgence, there's bragging, there's boasting. A man drunk at a party, there's also a lot of stupidity. And so on the final day of this party, after the 6-month-long exhibition of wealth and excess, the conversation turns from money and power to sexual prowess. Drunk men boasting about their conquests. And as these men boast, the king is not going to be outdone. And so he commands his 7 eunuchs. Eunuchs are castrated men placed over the king's harem. Not the best job in the kingdom, but it is a job. Verse 11 says he tells his eunuchs, bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a beautiful woman. And so essentially Xerxes has said, I've shown you that all my possessions are better than yours. Now let me show you that my sex toy is also better than yours. And so here's what's happening. This drunk man wants other drunk men to ogle and lust after his wife. It's disgusting. It's repulsive. It's depraved. In this culture, a man's worth was his wealth and his power. A woman's worth was in her sexuality and her physical appearance. Aren't you glad we don't live in a culture like that? Verse 12, but when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. This is a shame and honor culture, and so to not come would not only embarrass the king, it would put you at risk of his mercy and rage. And so these eunuchs, they come back, and it's an awkward moment. They return with no queen. And so the people at the party are like, he said his queen was coming. They begin whispering. They begin tweeting. Vashti said no. And we're told why Vashti said no. It said a lot of people, we aren't told why Vashti said no. And I know throughout history, and when I've heard this story told before, a lot of people, man, they want to cheer Vashti. Oh, she stood up to the king. And that's fine. I get where that's coming from. But I just want to make a point. We're going to make this a couple times tonight. We're not told by the author whether or not we're supposed to cheer for Vashti or we're supposed to boo her. We don't know what's happening. Maybe she's drunk too. Maybe this is a lover's quarrel. She's not standing up for the dignity of all women. She's just drunk and doesn't want to come out and see her husband. We don't know. We're not told. All we know, and all that's important to the story, because this is what the author told us, is that Vashti said no. Karen Jobe, she's one of the commentaries I'm reading to kind of prepare each week and study for this series. She warns against looking at these 4 characters in this story as good and bad examples. She writes this. She says, an exemplary approach is inadequate and misleading. It forces the interpreter to make ethical and moral judgments that the author himself refrains from making. It is natural for a reader to decide whether he or she likes or dislikes a character in the story. However, merely expressing one's opinion about and quoting biblical proof texts to back it up is not a critical interpretation of the text. And I do want what we do here to be a critical interpretation of the text. And so the king, he consults his advisors. Vashti said no. And his advisors, which are basically yes man, they want to soothe the king's damaged ego. And they say, King, I know, this isn't about you. This is a problem with all women not knowing their proper place in this society. And so he issues a written decree. First of all, in this decree, he banishes Vashti from the king's presence, which is ironic because that's what got her in trouble in the first place, not coming into the king's presence. But then he adds to the letter this part about sending out to the empire that men should be rulers of their home. And I don't know how they enforced this. I don't know who was knocking on everybody's door saying, man, are you a ruler of your home? Yes or no? But that was the verdict that they sent out. And that ends chapter 1 of this story. And so we begin reading now in chapter 2. And by this time, Xerxes has sobered up. And he's thinking about not having a queen. And he's like, I don't know if I like this. And so again, his attendants, they have this brilliant idea. Here it is. Let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. The young woman who pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. Now, in kids' church back there, I don't know if they're doing this story tonight or not, but I've heard this taught in kids' church, and it's a beauty contest, right? It's like the thing on Monopoly where you win second place for the beauty contest or whatever. It's like this Persian idol. Show up, and the most beautiful woman, she wins the contest. That's not exactly what's going on here. They're going to search the Persian Empire. It says to find beautiful young virgins. These are teenagers. To make them try out for the king. It's as vile and repulsive as it sounds. See, those with power treating other human beings like they exist for their benefit, rather than honoring as the human beings they are. It's happened all through society. Pretty girls as sex objects for men. We haven't changed a lot. Porn does the exact same thing. Or Africans as slaves for the cotton plantation owners. Or church members as checkbooks for people's private jets. Story goes on, verse 5. At that time, there was a Jewish man. It's important, again, that we know Jewish, God's chosen people, in the fortress of Susa, which was named Mordecai. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. Verse 7, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Esther is an adopted orphan. She's a Jew, living in a society that's not her own. That means she's insignificant. It means she has no power. All she has is a pretty face and an attractive figure, we're told. Attributes that culture and that king deemed valuable. Verse 8, as a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, up to 1,000 we're told, was brought to the king's harem. And so the question that is always asked at this part of the story, did Esther go willingly or reluctantly? Many have speculated, but again, we're not told. All we're told in the story is she was brought. That's all we're given. Now, it's unlikely that she had any say in the matter, but we're not invited by the author to speculate where her heart is in going or not going. Likewise, we don't know if Mordecai, her uncle, should have protected her, could have protected her, wanted to protect her. We want to know those things, don't we? And I've heard this taught where we guess what maybe people were thinking. I want to know. What were they thinking? How did this uncle let his niece be taken like this? But we're not told. Why are we not told? Because regardless of their motives, whether they were good or bad, God is doing something through Mordecai and Esther. Through these circumstances to fulfill a promise he made long ago. For the next year, Esther and all these young virgins are going to go through beauty treatments to get ready for their special night of being raped by the king. One commentary I read says it's as if they were lambs being fattened for a slaughter. And so after each of these girls would go in and take their turn with the king, there were 4 options that could happen. If he didn't like them, they'd become permanent concubines because he couldn't embarrass himself by sending them back out. And so they would be a permanent concubine belonging to the king as his property. They would never be called upon again, which was the good part of it, but they would be permanent widows, never to marry. It was a lonely, miserable life as a concubine living alone in the harem. Second option is if he liked them, he would call on them again when he wanted a blonde that night or a brunette that night. A handful of these women he would marry, and they would go on to become one of his wives, and their children would become heirs to the throne. And then the fourth option, there would be one who was most favored, and she would be his queen. And so Esther, she goes through all the beauty treatments. She gets the oils and the perfumes and facials and beautiful clothing and jewelry, and she gets to pick it all out. And she gets training on how to act proper and be a proper queen. But then we're told this important little nugget. Verse 10, Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so. This culture, this empire, was a dangerous place to be if you were the wrong kind of person. If you're a Jew, keep quiet about it. Keep a low profile. Just act like everyone else. Don't follow the dietary laws that God has given you. Don't pray. Don't use Jewish words. Hide your real self. And some of you here tonight know all too well what that feels like. To not be authentic. To not be able to be your true self for fear of backlash for being honest. To have those closest to you who might be well-meaning to tell you to keep a low profile. Verse 16, Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign. Very specific date here. And so Esther has waited in queue with these other virgins, watching each one by one being taken out, and now it's her turn. This is her first sexual encounter. And so she moves from the harem where she's been kept. She walks down the dark hallway to the king's private room where he lies waiting. It's not a beauty contest. This is a sex contest. The girl who performs the best to the king's liking, she wins. It's disgusting. But as we'll see, as the story plays out, God's salvation to his people comes because of this ungodly, disgusting, horrific event. Consider that for a moment. That God detests what is happening. One of his daughters is being robbed of her innocence, is being robbed of her future. She's seen only for her outward beauty, only for her ability to please this man in bed, and yet God will use this very unholy thing and this very unholy night to save his people. And if your mind doesn't immediately go to the cross with this story, you're missing out. In fact, this is kind of a theme in all of Scripture. Genesis 50:20, Joseph, when he's going through his trials, he says to the people, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. Paul writes in Romans 8, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. History is not circumstance. History is not happenstance. History is not chance. History is governed by providence, which means God can take something that is despicable, deplorable, depraved, just like this scene, and in his goodness somehow cause it to work for his glory and our good. Verse 17, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other women. The word here used as love, but the same word is used elsewhere, mainly as lust. And so we're just told the king lusted for Esther more than anyone else. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. And before we start playing the music and start chanting, all hail Queen Esther, now she can save her people, she's the queen, we got to remember, this crown is purely decorative. Esther is just another trophy wife. She has no more power than Queen Vashti, who came before her. She's simply an adorned sex puppet for the king's pleasure and nothing more. And if we were watching this on Netflix, and it was a 4-part series, I love those 4-part series because you don't have to invest too much time into them, that would be the end of episode 1. And so we're going to end our story there tonight and pick up next week. I'm going to keep talking for a while, though, because now we're going to pick this apart. What do we do with this story? It had some humor in the beginning. You guys were laughing. And then it got really serious all of a sudden in the room. What do we do with this story? Well, first of all, Why I encourage you to read the whole story is we need to know how the story ends. The readers of the story that the author was writing to, they would know that God did work through Esther to save the Jews. And so at the heart of this story is an invitation to see God at work without actually seeing God at work. In this story, if we read all the way through it, there aren't going to be any big miracles, no miracles at all. There's not going to be any visions. There's not going to be any special dreams. There's not going to be any burning bushes. There's not going to be an angel show up. God's not going to bring down thunder and lightning. God's not going to speak audibly to Esther or Mordecai. God is going to stay hidden. God is going to stay silent the entire story. And so one of the things we can take away tonight is that the silence of God isn't the absence of God. There are occasions in Scripture when God does something spectacular to save his people or move them to some sort of action. The 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, tongues of fire at Pentecost, times when it is obvious that God is present and that God is working in a supernatural way. I'm going to tell you, those times are few and far between. God works in this story, and God works most often in our story, not through the visible hand of miracles and prophecy, but the invisible hand of providence. I run in a lot of Christian circles, right? And so there's this desire in a lot of these circles for this big supernatural working of God. And that's okay. But then we begin to obsess over God's will in our lives. What does God want me to do? I'm listening. I want to hear him speak to me. And then that begins to lead to fear and trepidation. What if I missed God's voice? What if I didn't hear God's voice? What if I take a wrong step? And we have all this fear that builds up. Or then it leads to, we're tired of waiting to hear God speak to us, and so we just write the narrative for God. God wants me to do this, because that's what I want to do. God wants me to do that, because I think maybe that's what he wants me to do. God does not speak in this story, not one single time. But his silence is not absence. He is working on his promises, even when it looks like he is nowhere to be found. Where we left off tonight, I chose for a reason because I think it's a bit of a cliffhanger. We're supposed to wonder, Esther's been brought to this royal position. Now what? What's God doing? We can't see him, he's hidden, but what is God up to? And again, not to give too many spoiler alerts, but by the end of this story, what we're going to see is just coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. If they had not happened exactly as they happened, all the Jews and all of Persia would have been killed and destroyed. See, God said to Abraham, I'm going to save the world through your family. That's tough to do when the family is completely wiped out. And so a lot of times we'll read the Bible and we'll see the 10 plagues upon Egypt. And we're like, wow, now that's God at work. But what about Xerxes, cross-eyed, drunk, asking other men to lust after his wife? Wow, now there's God at work. But as we watch this story play out, Xerxes getting drunk and boasting about his trophy wife, God uses all of that to work out his plan of salvation for his people. Or what if Esther wasn't beautiful? I mean, that is part of the story. What if Mordecai hadn't adopted her and just let her go by the wayside? What if the king wasn't into her type? See, there's this incredible string of coincidences that aren't so much coincidences, but God working in extraordinary ways with ordinary things. And so the second thing I think we take away from the story tonight is coincidence may be more than they appear. And so let me ask you, what's God doing in your life? And maybe you're like, I don't know, not much. God seems kind of quiet right now. I'm kind of in the waiting game. So let's process another question. How did you end up here tonight? Why are you here? April 23rd. What year is it? 2022. How'd you end up here? What coincidences brought you here tonight, and why? Want to know how I ended up here? You might not, but too bad. I got the microphone. I ended up here tonight because I disobeyed my parents when I was 5 years old. Let me take you through the story. So I was young for my grade. I got a late birthday, really young kindergartner. My parents decided I was small. Maybe I was slow, I don't know, but they decided to hold me back in kindergarten. But my parents always took their vacation in August, right when school was starting. And so they were on vacation. My grandma took me to school. I did not want to do kindergarten again, so I went on to first grade. Now, this is in the 80s. Apparently, the schools had no checks and balances on anything. Somehow, they come back from vacation, and Brian's a first grader and not a kindergartner. Too late. We're not going to embarrass him and send him back. So, yay. I get to high school. I meet this girl, Karen. We're in the same grade. Oh, good thing that happened. And Karen, by the way, would never date somebody in a lower grade than her. So thank goodness we were in the same grade. We happened to become really good friends. By the way, I kind of thought she was hot. And so we go on a date. And we went to Pizza Hut because that's what you did in the town that I lived in. And I ate my pizza with a fork, and she did not go out with me again for a long time. It's like, what kind of Neanderthal eats pizza with a fork? By the end of my junior year, my charms were able to move her past the fork thing, and we started dating. Now, some of you know my story. I grew up as a Mormon. Karen grew up as a Christian. And so as we were dating, we had lots of hard discussions. We were both very passionate about our religion, and I will say they were both religions for us at that time. And so we had several breakups over religion. We had several makeups because we did love each other. Long story short, we did eventually marry, and we decided to leave all of religion behind, except for work. We made that our new religion. And we finally had a kid, Kennedy, who will be home from college this next week. And we're working 80, 90, 100 hours a week, and we're like, this kind of sucks. We got this kid at home, we work all the time, and so you know what? We need a fresh start. So somehow, God brought two people together that were crazy enough to say, you know what? The heck with it. Selling everything, hopping in a car, moving our 3-month-old to Florida where we don't know a single person. We get to Florida, Karen says, we don't know anybody here. We should make some friends. We should go to a church. She's working on me a little bit. I knew what was happening, but I'm like, okay, I'll go to church with you as long as we can skip that stupid greeting time because I am not hugging anybody at that place. Well, what a coincidence. We ended up at just the right church at just the right time to hear just the message I needed to hear, actually many messages that I needed to hear. And in fact, that church, I disagree with a lot of their theology today, but at that time, in that moment, those were the messages that I needed to hear. And eventually, we're like, it's interesting what God's done in our lives. We're a couple crazy people. Let's start some businesses, and let's see if we can maybe set ourselves up to go into ministry full-time by starting these businesses. And she was crazy enough to do that with me. And then she was crazy enough to say, let's start a church for church outsiders, for people who don't belong in any other churches, kind of like we feel right now. And so now I'm here. That's why I'm here tonight. You're listening to me preach this message because I disobeyed my parents when I was 5 years old and I thought Karen was hot. What a coincidence. What brought you here? I bet a lot of you could tell a very similar story of just coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. Maybe you heard a podcast or saw us post something on Facebook and you ended up showing up here. Or maybe a friend mentioned it. You know, I know a lot of people are here in this church because you were hurt by another church. And so that's the third point I want to pull out of the story tonight, that God works through morally compromised people in this story. So I keep hitting this. This story is not about Mordecai and Esther being our moral examples or the heroes. Their decisions throughout this story are morally ambiguous at best. And again, if we go through this story and we look how other people tell the story, if you go to a feminist kind of group, they'll say, oh, we love Vashti. You know, she stood up to her man and she suffered the consequences. But that Esther, she got all her power by sleeping with the man and sleeping her way to the top. And she does everything that the men in her life want her to do. She gives into this misogynistic culture. She's a sellout. And then if you go the opposite direction and you go to the really conservative rabbis, because this is a Jewish story, they'll say, you know, Esther, she should have looked at Daniel's story. I mean, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they upheld their values. They stood firm in the law. They stood up to the king. But Esther, She doesn't say a thing. She doesn't act like a Jew. She broke the laws of Moses. She sleeps with a man she's not married to. That breaks the law. She marries a non-Jew. She gives into the secular culture. She's a total sellout. Esther probably got a lot of things wrong. And so let's admit that. But God stays with her. And God grows her. And God has patience with her. And God uses her to be the savior of his people. This is good news. Most of us, all of us, sell out from time to time. We give into culture. We judge others. We value the wrong things. We become a part of the world's harem. We take advice from the wrong people. But that's the good news. No matter how bad we screw up, we can't write ourselves out of God's story. The story of Esther isn't that God saves and that God blesses those who are morally excellent people. It's that God persistently gives grace to those who don't ask for it, those who don't deserve it, and those who don't fully appreciate it after they're given it. Over and over and over again. Esther isn't the only story in the Bible. It's part of a bigger story. That's why we can read this story that fits HBO better than the Bible, and we're able to see God hidden within the story. That's how we can find God hidden in our own stories. So I'm going to be really honest because I just think that's who we should be as a church and transparent, and I don't like spin and propaganda. David and Sarah resigning, the pastors that were here, if you don't know, it hurt. I was disappointed. I was let down. And frankly, my pride was a little hurt because I was embarrassed because I recruit them, I presented them to you. It wasn't the right fit, and they left. It was a hard 2 weeks for me. But then this series, Esther. Guess what? I didn't pick this series. I was letting them pick what we were going to preach upon. So I didn't pick this. The only reason I continued it is Sarah, who does beautiful artwork, had already done the artwork for the series. I didn't feel like doing new artwork. I'm like, sure, I can do 4 weeks on Esther. What a coincidence. That God gave us a book of the Bible to study when we as a church need to see his invisible hand guiding this church where he wants it to go. See, there's a time coming in this story where Esther, she's going to have to take an inventory of all these coincidences. And she's going to have to pause, and she's going to have to do some nuanced thinking to see God in the story and to figure out what action he wants her to take in the story. And so I'll close with this. I'm going to have the band come up as we finish with the time of praising God. The salvation of God's people is going to come from an ungodly, horrific event. And Esther's innocence is going to be brutally taken away by horrible sin. I said earlier that should sound familiar to you. Our salvation comes because another Savior offered up his innocence to be taken away by our horrible sin. And on the cross, it was despicable, it was deplorable, but God used it for his glory and to give us freedom. And so as you look at your life tonight, maybe there are no miracles happening, or maybe no burning bushes and no angels. Maybe you've never, like me, heard the audible voice of God. But you know what you do have in your life? You have coincidence. You have circumstance. You have happenstance. And most of all, because of the cross, you have Jesus. Can you see Jesus at work in your story? Can you see God hidden in your story? Are you willing to trust him in the coincidences? Are you willing to let him move you all in? And so let's respond tonight as we sing.